to another episode of Storytelling That Sells. This is our fourth episode, and we are really engaged now in this whole concept of understanding how stories shape the way that we behave. Storytelling is not just about how human beings speak to each other and how people start to follow someone's point of view. It's also about how we bring biases into situations and how certain stories are more acceptable and believable to us than stories that we might otherwise see from somebody else. And one way to articulate this is the very unfortunate second mass shooting that we have had in this country in the last 2 weeks. So we had Buffalo, where an 18-year-old drove hours from rural New York to murder Black people in a supermarket. He completely designed the whole assault, even did a previous day reconnaissance of the supermarket before he actually went in and performed this hideous task. And then this week, we had the murder of 19 elementary school children in Texas. And as a father of 3 children who made it through their school years and are now young adults, I am extremely pained by what happened to those children and to the 2 adults in that building as well. And while we could really dwell on the politics of gun laws, and we could get angry at each other over our biases, I focus on how human beings are reacting to these stories, because to me, the ability to change the dynamic we have in this country really relies on us getting enough Americans motivated to get legislators to change laws. And what we have seen over the last 2 decades in America has been a loosening of gun laws. We have people pushing back on background checks and mental health checks. We have people fighting the restriction of assault rifles. We have states pushing for concealed carry. If I have concealed carry in my state, the federal government should force every other state to allow me to conceal and carry in their state without any restrictions. So in America, we are backsliding in terms of the ability for Americans to protect themselves. And of course, what you have is a ridiculous number of mass shootings compared to the rest of the world. According to one source, between 1998 and 2019, we had 101 shootings in which 4 or more people were killed. The closest country to us is France. They had 8. They had less than 1/10 of the number of mass shootings. And the reason why, since we had the mass shooting at Sandy Hook, where even smaller children were murdered in larger numbers by a young person carrying assault rifles, is that we don't do anything about this. Australia, when they had a mass shooting, just took away guns from everybody, and Australia has seen a dramatic drop in mass shootings. New Zealand, after the Christchurch murder, convinced the country to remove access to certain kinds of weapons. And we look at America and we say, why don't we get there? And I believe the answer is storytelling. And I think I have a couple of examples here that help prove this. The first one is just the concept that we get riveted two stories based on our own biases, what we bring into a situation, regardless of the facts. And not only did we have these mass shootings, but we also had the fatal shooting on Sunday on a Q train in Manhattan of a gentleman who was just on the subway. I think he was going to see a friend or something. And this follows a couple of weeks after a mass shooting attempt in Brooklyn where nobody died, but quite a few people were injured. And of course, the imagery of how safe it is to be on the subway, everybody's going ballistic. Well, the truth is, according to police statistics, we have had the same number of deaths on the subway at about this time this year as we did last year. So ridership is up because we are getting more back to normal here in the New York City area. People are commuting back to work. It's not by any stretch of the imagination what it was pre-pandemic, but more visitors are coming to New York City. More New Yorkers are getting out of their homes and using the subway to get around New York, and commuters are coming to New York, and day trippers, weekenders are coming into the city. So ridership has been up, yet the number of felony crimes is only about 2% of the overall city crime, which is kind of what it was before the pandemic. So here you have this imagery in quite a bit of the press coverage that look how unsafe New York City is, look how unsafe the subways are. And in some respects, it's just not true. The imagery is so powerful, and our amygdala is such a powerful part of our body, of our brain, of our emotions and our reactions, that we tend to give more weight to imagery than we do actual facts. And then I saw this again in some interactions on social media with someone that I know. I'm going to call this person a friend. I posted about how I believe the easy access to guns, especially assault rifles, is a clear reason why we have 18-year-olds capable of walking into a school and to murder large numbers of people. And this person posted something about how the Jews would have been able to fight back more during the Holocaust if they had had better access to guns. And I have seen this tired trope brought out year after year throughout our awful fight with guns in the United States, for as long as I can remember. And I did some research on it because it's quite a powerful story that some people have adopted in order to confirm their own bias about restricting access to guns. And what I tried to say to this individual is that they were very susceptible to a meme, and quite a few memes, actually. It's been produced in many forms. Who it's produced by, I'm not sure, but clearly it's people who are concerned about their gun rights taken away. And my post was only about a sensible gun law. I never said anything about taking away people's rights to guns. I said, I believe we need to have a serious discussion about sensible gun laws in the United States. And so I did some research because I'm not completely versed on the Germans' Weapon Act of 1938. After the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, the previous administration, before the Nazis took over, essentially they banned all gun ownership because the country was destabilized, inflation was out of control, there was tremendous unemployment, and the Treaty of Versailles actually said that they needed to do certain things when it came to gun ownership as punishment for starting World War I. And some people gave back their guns, some people didn't. It was loosely applied. But then in 1938, the German Weapons Act deregulated the acquisition and transfer of rifles, shotguns, and ammunition. Now, this was an act in Germany. So there were only about 214,000 Jewish people in Germany at the time. At the same time, there were 3.7 million Germans enlisted in the German land army. There were another 400,000 people in the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, the Waffen SS, which was sort of the stormtroopers of the German army, had 35,000. And by 1940, 2 years after this act, the German army was 4.5 million. The Luftwaffe tripled in size to 1.2 million. And the Waffen SS grew to 50,000. So here's this person trying to tell me that if Jewish people had not suffered under the laws of Germany taking away their rights to own guns, and you know, the Jews hid guns. They actually did try to resist in some form. But how does she really believe that the Jewish Germans had any chance of using their right to bear arms to protect themselves against those kinds of numbers? And 214,000 Jewish people includes women and children. Those weren't all men. Now, let's go outside Germany. Let's go to the fact that in the Warsaw Ghetto, there were, quite a few thousand Jews there, and they did rise up against the Nazis. 7,000 Jewish people died. 50,000 were sent off to concentration camps. And that didn't slow down the final solution. We have a major issue in the United States outside of gun laws and outside of some of the problems that beset our society. And one of them is not being able to discern truth and facts from very well-crafted stories that are designed to bring us into a situation that we are already biased to believe in, to have an emotional attraction to, and to grow in some kind of strength. Okay, I'm stronger because I believe the Jews could have slowed down the Holocaust if they just had guns. And I need to believe that because I believe that my government wants to take away my guns to perform some kind of oppression on me. People in Canada have strict gun laws. In Israel, the home of Holocaust survivors, the home of a persecuted people, every single adult male has to become a part of the army. There are guns everywhere in the hands of Jewish people, and they don't have the mass murder by Israelis on other Israelis that we do in the United States. And I think there's a lot at play here that many Americans have knee-jerk reactions to because of the stories that they've either lived leading up to their adult life or the stories that they ingest on a regular basis based on the media that they digest every day. So if you digest fearful media every day, to me, you're probably training your brain to be more prone to a meme that says a bunch of murdered children is acceptable even against sensible gun laws because we're still protecting me from being persecuted by the US government. And I just think this is craziness. We've had two 18-year-old boys in a stretch of less than 2 weeks take their pain and their suffering and expel that pain and suffering through the end of an assault rifle. I just feel like the only reason why we never do anything about gun laws in the United States, why we tolerate Sandy Hook and Parkland, and now this school in Uvalde in Texas, is because we have a bunch of people out there who are fearful, to me unnecessarily, that somehow the United States government, which our military is populated by Americans, this is not some foreign force that's going to come in and oppress you. It is populated by people whom I know so many Americans who have been soldiers and who are soldiers today. I live right next door to West Point. I see the families. I interact with them. I interact with the cadets on a regular basis. The majority of these people are good, law-abiding Americans, just like the rest of us. And I'm not fearful of them having tanks and guns and airplanes. And how irrational would it be for me to believe that if I had an AR-15 in my home, that I'd actually have a chance of protecting myself? That's absurd. The same way it's absurd for us to believe these memes that the Jewish people could have protected themselves if they had had more guns in the late 1930s and early 1940s against the German Wehrmacht. That's insanity, ladies and gentlemen. But what is it doing? There are people who are playing to the emotions and the fear of susceptible people. And as a result, we don't elect legislators who are interested in sensible gun laws. When we do have a balance, as we currently do in the Senate, it's very close to even in terms of both sides of the aisle. We don't have enough votes to produce legislation that could potentially reduce the number of mass shootings like this. What if AR-15s could only be held at a shooting range? Why do they have to be in the homes with easy access to disturbed 18-year-olds? You can have your AR-15, but just let's keep it in places where they're locked up, where when you do want to shoot them and enjoy them, you can shoot them safely. But why do you have to be able to carry them out in the streets? That's craziness. And if anybody ever spoke confidentially and privately to police officers, as I've had the good fortune to do living so close to New York City, I have rarely had a New York City police officer or state trooper tell me that they are happy with the prospect that anybody in my state during a stop, a road stop, during an altercation at someone's home in a domestic case, they don't like the idea that they could be walking into a situation where someone has an assault rifle. None of them, privately and confidentially, has ever said to me that makes them feel safer doing their jobs. But they keep their opinions quiet for a variety of reasons. And as a result, even our law enforcement officers rarely speak up for sensible gun laws. I was going to talk about public speaking today in this podcast, but there are 19 sets of parents who will never hold their children again after this week. There are more families who will never see the deceased in Buffalo. We have fear amongst Black people in the United States, and to some degree, rightfully so, that there are Americans who would rather see them dead because those Americans believe they're being replaced. And so violence at the end of a gun is what is the result of these stories. This is a very painful thing for me to think about because I am the father of 3 children. And today, as I think about the kind of legislation that I want in the United States, the kinds of discussions I want to have with Americans to protect the children and the fathers and the mothers of those children. I want sensible gun laws like so many other countries have that don't prevent people from exercising their freedoms, but also don't put an undue burden and fear on the majority of Americans who, when you look at polls, consistently say, I'm okay with sensible gun laws protecting society. That's the majority of Americans. And if somehow we are a democracy, shouldn't we lean towards that sensibility? But what I know is what we've just discussed today, or what I've discussed. And I'm welcome to having opposing viewpoints on this podcast to talk about not the politics, but the stories that they've grown up with, the stories that they believe in and how they feel. Stories shape truth, and how stories should potentially shape the body politic in the United States. But here are some tips and tricks for communicating in this environment. Number 1, if you are inclined to share a meme on social media, please understand there are people who are prone to seeing those memes and forming strong opinions. And if your design is to get them to favor your opinion, then I get why you do that. And it's very effective, because remember what I said about how there is this bell curve of life. And this particular individual sits on the front end of that bell curve for fear. And so she is more likely to look at that meme, have her brain triggered to go, oh my goodness, we must stop sensible gun laws. We need to protect ourselves, arming people in situations like schools and hospitals, theme parks, giving people who aren't trained 16, 20 hours a month to desensitize themselves to fear, to compassion, to all the things that are natural to human beings in a situation like that about taking another person's life. You have to desensitize a human being so that they can go in and perform that important task of taking out an active shooter. That is not something we can do to school teachers, to a security officer who rarely has to actually pull their revolver out in those situations. And yet, that's what these individuals pose to me as the options to sensible gun laws. So please be careful when you're sharing memes, because there are people like my friend here in Orange County, and I believe that she is a very large percentage of the population. It's a fraction of the population, but it's big enough that legislators pay attention to people like her. And these people vote for people who have non-sensible gun law mentalities. So please be careful about the memes that you share. If you are going to share one of those memes, go do some research first and start to think about the actual facts behind a meme. So I guess those are my 2 tips. Think before you communicate, and educate yourself to see if you're really comparing apples to apples. I am extremely feeling down right now, because I remember when I started hearing about what was happening in Newton, Connecticut, and when I started to understand the gravity of the deaths of those little children in that town. I still had children in elementary school and middle school, and it pained me to realize that we probably as a country were too bought into stories of fear. And fear is probably the most powerful human emotion to motivate us to take action. Love and compassion, for some reason, just aren't as strong as fear, because fear is about survival, and love and compassion comes from a place that you have to enter into, versus fear entering into you and causing you to act. So that's why people like Hitler have used fear of replacement, fear of the other. That's why fear is always used by some demagogues to populate their speeches and their stories, because they know it's a much more powerful tool to get you to act. Please be careful, because every step you take when you communicate and contribute to this national dialogue could lead us to doing nothing, and then put in the hands of a disturbed young man the weapons of mass destruction. I'm sorry this is a downer podcast, but I just didn't see how I could talk today without talking about one of the most important stories going on in our lives right now. I do wish you safety and health, love and compassion as you journey till the next podcast. And I am hoping that in my next podcast, I'll be able to take a lighter note. Until then, be safe.